Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel about ancient Egypt. This video is about the story of Bentresh and the phenomenon of exorcism. The story of Bentresh is traditional to a monumental inscription, also known as the Bentresh stela. This document provides a great insight into ancient Egyptian ideas about possessing spirits. Well, some of you might know exorcism from horror movies like The Exorcist. However, as we are going to see, the exorcism performed in the Bentresh stela was much smoother than in Hollywood movies. So let's have a closer look at the story of Bentresh. Before we get deeper into the story of Bentresh, I would like to provide you with some more background information so you get a better understanding of its historical, political and religious context. The Bentresh stela was discovered in 1829 in a Ptolemaic sanctuary adjacent to the temple of Khonsu in Karnak. The Karnak temples are the largest temple complex of Egypt in Karnak, a village about 2.5 kilometers north of Luxor or ancient Thebes. The temple of Khonsu is a temple located within the temple district of the Amun temple and was built under Ramses III and is still relatively well preserved. After the discovery, the stela was transported to Paris in 1844 and now stands in the Louvre Museum in Paris. The stela is a hieroglyphic text consisting of 28 lines carved into sandstone, measuring about 2.2 to 1.1 meters. The scene in the lunette shows King Ramses II offering incense before the so-called bark of Khonsu in Thebes, Neferhotep. Before the king, a priest offers incense before the smaller bark of Khonsu, the provider in Thebes. Khonsu in Thebes, Neferhotep, and Khonsu the provider in Thebes are two manifestations of the Egyptian god Khonsu. At Thebes, Khonsu formed part of a family triad with Mut as his mother and Amun as his father. These three gods were the primary objects of worship in the massive temple complex of Karnak. So Khonsu was the ancient Egyptian god of the moon. His name means traveler, and this may relate to the nightly travel of the moon across the sky. Khonsu was instrumental in the creation of life and all living creatures. Khonsu was represented either as a youth or a falcon-headed god with a moon disk on his head and a crescent on his head, as we can see here. As a healing deity, Khonsu's power to expel evil spirits and to cure patients gained importance in the course of time. We know, for example, that the Ptolemaic ruler, Ptolemy IV Philadelphus, was presumably healed from an unknown illness through the intervention by Khonsu. So Khonsu had also a violent and bloodthirsty aspect, but he was also a god of light who drives dark forces with his divine power. So it was believed that he could ward off evil threats. This relates also to exorcism as a religious practice of casting out shadowy spiritual entities from a possessed person through the presence of a more powerful being. So the Bentresh stela appears to be a monument of Ramses II, also known as Ramses the Great, so one of the most powerful kings of the Egyptian New Kingdom. It was also Ramses II who led several military campaigns to the Levant, reasserting Egyptian control over this region. However, the Bentresh stela is an ancient Egyptian example of pseudo-historiography. So, pseudo-historiography means a literary document aimed at enhancing its credibility by including historical elements, but ones that usually do not precisely correspond with actual historical events. So although the stela gives the impression of being from the time of Ramses II, iconographic, linguistic and epigraphic evidence clearly shows that it was a product from a later period. Most likely it was created during the Persian rule in the late period, or during the Ptolemaic dynasty, who was a Macedonian Greek family ruling in Egypt during the Hellenistic period. The story of Bentresh was probably made up by Theban priests, but the fact that the characters depicted in the story have many things in common with actual historical figures reveals that these Theban priests must have been well versed in the history of Ramses II. The text possesses historical knowledge such as about Egyptian doctors abroad, or about historical marriages during the time of Ramses II. The precise purpose of the story of Bentresh is somehow unclear. Maybe it was some sort of Gegenwartbewältigung or Vergangenheitsverarbeitung, to use your two German terms. I haven't found a proper English translation for these two terms, but it refers to the fact that the glorious past recalled in the story stays in big contrast with the time during which the story was created. So maybe the story was created to recall the glory of native Egyptian kings during a time of foreign Persian or Ptolemaic domination, or maybe the text was also created to glorify the Egyptian god Khonsu in his two principal manifestations, Khonsu the provider in Thebes and Khonsu in Thebes Neferhotep. But now let's retell the story of Bentresh. So, when the Egyptian king Ramses II traveled to Naharin in the Levant, the prince of a region called Bachtan gives him his eldest daughter in marriage. Ramses II names her Neferuha and makes her his queen. So this Neferuha becomes an Egyptian name and goes to Egypt and lives there with Ramses II as his wife. A few years later, a messenger arrives from the Prince of Bachtan and announces that Neferuha's younger sister, called Bentresh, has become ill. Ramses II then sends a scribe and doctor called Jehutiemheb to the Prince of Bachtan, but this Jehutiemheb can only make the diagnosis that Bentresh has been seized by some sort of spirit or demon. The Prince of Bachtan then asks Ramses II to send him a god to fight against this spirit. Ramses II sends Khonsu, the provider, also called the great god who expels demons, to the Prince of Bachtan in the form of his statue. So the ancient Egyptians believed that the god lives within the statue, and the god travels in the form of a statue in his great bark, accompanied by chariots and horses and boats and priests. So Khonsu travels for 1 year and 5 months to Bachtan, and upon the arrival, the Dr. Jehutiemheb performs a protective spell and Bentresh immediately heals. After the expulsion, the spirit addresses Khonsu the provider and praises him for this great deed in Bachtan. Khonsu the provider allows the spirit to go back to the place from which he has come, presumably the netherworld. The spirit then involves the Egyptian god to celebrate with him and with the prince of Bachtan. But now let's have a closer look to the corresponding passage in the text. He placed himself on his belly, saying, "You have come to us to be gracious to us, as commanded by the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Usurmare Sotep-Benre." Then the god proceeded to the place where Bentresh was. He made magical protection for the daughter of the prince of Bachtan, and she became well instantly. Then spoke the spirit who was with her to Khons the provider in Thebes. "Welcome in peace, great God who expels disease demons. Bachtan is your home, its people are your servants, I am your servant. I shall go to the place from which I came, so as to set your heart at rest about that which you came for. May your majesty command to make a feast day with me and the prince of Bachtan." Then the god motioned approval to his priest, saying, "Let the prince of Bachtan make a great offering before this spirit." Now while this took place between Khons the provider in Thebes and the spirit, the prince of Bachtan stood by with his soldiers and was very frightened. Then he made a great offering to Khons the provider in Thebes and the spirit, and the prince of Bachtan made a feast day for them. Then the spirit went in peace to where he wished, as commanded by Khons the provider in Thebes. The prince of Bachtan rejoiced very greatly together with everyone in Bachtan. Later the prince of Bachtan proclaims to keep the Egyptian god with him and to not send him back to Egypt. Maybe he thought that it is quite useful to have such a powerful god with him. Thus Khonsu spent 3 years and 9 months in Bachtan. But then one night, in a nightmare, Khonsu the provider appears to the prince of Bachtan, and the prince of Bachtan sees Khonsu in this dream coming out of his shrine as a falcon of God, flying up to the sky toward Egypt. And therefore, finally, the prince of Bachtan lets the Egyptian god go back home. So, as we have seen, the Bentresh stela records an account of a healing by the Egyptian god Khonsu, describing in detail how a statue of Khonsu was sent by the great Egyptian king Ramses II in order to help a foreign princess who was obsessed by some sort of demoniac spirit. However, the attitude of the Egyptian god Khonsu towards the spirit is quite tolerant. The exorcism is the result of a negotiation and is quite non-violent. This recalls also the exorcism of a Gerasene demoniac performed by Jesus according to the New Testament. The demon recognizes the sovereignty of the healer, but is able to negotiate something similar to Jesus' healing of these obsessed Gadarenes. So this practice of negotiation might even come from Egypt. The idea that demons exist and can possess people is stuff of fiction and horror movies, but also one of the most widely held religious beliefs in the world. In general, almost all cultures have a tradition of spirit entities, and most believe in some form of possession by demons. Spirit entities are usually understood to be invisible and intangible under normal circumstances. However, they can make themselves known through the influence they exert on the world and especially on people. So a wide range of physical symptoms and behaviors has been attributed to spirit possession. However, these attributes towards spirit possession vary widely across the cultures. In many cultures, exorcists played a social role similar to doctors or psychotherapists, healing people by driving out unwanted spirits or demons. So the idea that invading spirits are inherently evil is largely a Christian concept. Many religions and belief systems accepted the possession by a spirit for a short period of time by both beneficent and malevolent entities. They might have regarded possession as something unusual, but not a very alarming aspect of life. So while spirit possession is regarded as something extraordinary by the modern Western culture, it was, or it is in many cultures, an ordinary part of spiritual life. So especially in Western culture, psychology has provided new ways of interpreting attributes commonly associated with spirit possession, such as hysteria, epilepsy, mania, and so on. However, whether or not one believes in the existence of spirit possession, the effects of those beliefs are realities in many cultures, and this is notably true for ancient Egypt. I would like to finish this video with 3 book recommendations. I will put the descriptions of the book below, together with a link to where you can buy them. So the first book is called Ancient Egyptian Literature, Volume 3, The Late Period, by Miriam Lichtheim. There you can find a complete English translation of the Story of Bentresh. The second book is by Richard Wilkinson. In English it's called The God and Goddesses of Ancient Egypt. And here I have the German translation of the book called Die Welt der Götter im alten Ägypten. So in this book you can find many more information about the ancient Egyptian belief system and also more information about the Egyptian god Khonsu. The third book I would like to recommend you is called Spirit Possession Around the World by Joseph Laycock, I think. That book is a compendium of belief systems related to spirit possession. So I hope you enjoyed this video about the story of Bentresh and exorcism in ancient Egypt. Please also hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe to my channel.